Welcome to Thunderbird, and welcome to our new experiment on doing business in today's China. It's a China Town Hall event, collaborative effort between the Thunderbird School of Global Management and the Chinese Chamber of Commerce. So, John, do you want to say anything there?
Okay. Chinese Chamber of Commerce has doing something like this over 8 years. We are the connection with China and the US for a long time. We did a seminar how to do business in China and workshop with Thunderbird School more than 10 years ago. And we are the same team, still doing the same thing today. And basically nothing totally new, just discuss the same old topic, which is the most important topic of China-US relation, how to do business with China.
Okay. All right. So thank you, John. And let me just say for myself, this is just such a wonderful opportunity. We did our first town hall on April 30th, and that one was sponsored by Global Ties Arizona. And this one, again, in collaboration, and by the way, Global Ties, Barry, the chairman of the board, Barry, is here. And we just think that it's such an important moment to really be thinking deeply about U.S. China relations. I think I caught, John, your attention, and maybe Barry, you had thought about it too when we talked. I truly believe a couple of key things. One, U.S.-China relations are at a very difficult moment right now. I've been a China scholar for about 30 plus years, and I haven't been this nervous. I think U.S.-China relations are at a key moment, and it's very important that people who care think deeply about what it is that we're going to do right now, right? But there's also an interesting thing. I've had a long and winding road to find my way to Phoenix. I used to spend my summers in Phoenix when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old because my grandfather was a professor at Arizona State University. And back then, Phoenix was not what it is today, right? Today, it's the fastest growing economy in America. It's the 5th largest city and the 5th largest economy in America. And it is the site of some very important economic developments that I believe, and John, you quoted me back to myself on this, I believe that Phoenix stands to be ground zero for positive U.S.-China relations for the decade going forward. I believe that. That is not just me pumping up Thunderbird. That is me believing that this is what is happening today. This is an incredible moment for U.S.-China relations, and it's an incredible moment for thinking about where we are going to go collectively as a community, right? And so here I am. I have had a winding career, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, but I'm here in Phoenix at Thunderbird School of Global Management, a very special institution in its own right. And I'm here building ties with people like Global Ties Arizona, the Chinese Chamber of Commerce, and all other institutions that are really care about this issue. And so a couple of weeks ago, John came to me and said, why don't we start having regular events? Why don't we do this? And I had the pleasure of Sunny and Lisa coming over here. I thought we were just going to be filming, and the next thing I know, Sunny's got her camera out and Lisa's interviewing, and we're talking about what it is to be on this journey of being a China scholar, being engaged with China and U.S.-China relations. And so this is not, I'm going to lecture a little bit because I just want to talk a little bit about what some of the key issues are and what our perspective on things is, but this is really a conversation. The reason we're here to have a town hall is to have a group conversation with you. So I'm going to set the tone a little bit. But on our panel today, we also have a couple of key people from the Thunderbird community. And so what I would like to do is, goodness, doesn't seem like mine.
I think that this is connected with our computer.
So Pearl, do you want to take a quick second and introduce yourself to the group? And then again, we'll come up and have some group conversation, but who are you?
Great. Hi, everybody. It's great to meet you all or see some of you again. My name is Pearl Chang Esau. I am from California originally. My family immigrated to the United States 1 year before I was born. So everyone in my family lives, at that time, lived in Taiwan. So my grandparents were part of the group that left China during the Cultural Revolution and ended up in Taiwan. So we have kind of this long family history there. And then my dad had this wonderful opportunity to work at UCLA to be a postdoctorate in none other than the field of semiconductors, which has become suddenly a very relevant topic for Phoenix, Arizona. And I grew up there, was very fortunate to, have a lot of things my parents didn't have, because my parents really had to start over when they left China. And like my dad grew up without running water and, things like that. So I had a lot of opportunities growing up. And when I graduated from college, I really wanted to go into public service. I wanted to give back because I felt like I had received so much. And so I joined this nonprofit organization called Teach for America, which some of you may have heard of. And it essentially recruits graduates from all over the country who may or may not be going into education, but assigns them to teach in some of the most challenging public schools in the United States. So I worked in Teach for America, and of course, I fell in love with the idea of education and it being this great opportunity to level the playing field for people no matter where they came from. And of course, with my great immigrant background, that was a very aspirational idea for me. I thought I can really empathize with that. So I ended up teaching in East Los Angeles, Boyle Heights. And through that journey brought me to Arizona, where I became the executive director of Teach for America in this region. And after that, I continued to go deeper into education and worked on education policy, raising standards for Arizona education, working on a number of public-private initiatives, during which time I served appointments. I actually somehow managed to serve through 3 different governors, including most recently Governor Ducey. And then a few years ago, I started my own consulting. So now I focus on public-private partnership development with the goal of making a positive social impact and creating more opportunity for people through education, the economy, and the environment. And I am here because I am a student. It's been a long time since I've been a student, but last year I re-enrolled and I'm getting my executive master's in global management, focus on international business and digital transformation. As I personally contemplate a next step for myself, I'm thinking about how I might look more towards international business and international business expansion with my consulting company. So I'm delighted to be here and to be invited by Professor Guthrie and Tate to participate in this conversation. But I might be the least knowledgeable person in the room. I'm here to have a conversation from the standpoint of being a student based on everything that I've been learning. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Pearl. And I got so many exciting things to say about who Pearl is and what the thing, but I'm going to let Tate go first, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about our panel. Tate, over to you.
I am Tate Mulligan. I grew up in North Texas. I was an exchange student when I turned 18, and it just changed my life. I moved to Argentina, learned Spanish, and it just opened my eyes. I then graduated. I then went to school at Rhodes College in Memphis and studied international relations and history. Again, I was a community scholar at the time, and so a lot of theory and practical knowledge. After graduating, I went into NGO work in Belize, and after COVID, started working on pandemic relief and kind of pivoted from nonprofit work into marketing and communication, started working for the largest ad agency in the world. But then really was like, I want to go back to school. I want to better myself and upskill. So I too own my own company, and I do a lot of marketing and strategic work. I attend Thunderbird full time, and I'm part of a team of faculty, including Doug, staff here, and students who've started the Foreign Policy Initiative. So we really want to further the conversation on how foreign policy affects business and organizations. So yeah, that's me. Glad to be here.
So thank you both for your introductions. And let me just say something really quick, and welcome to everybody who's continuing to come along and join us in what we're doing. And we have about 15 people online as well. So we have to make sure we speak loud. And I'm hoping that I did okay with the technical aspects because I'm not so good at the technical things. But the key thing I want to emphasize again is we are here because we care about this issue. We care about U.S. China relations. I care deeply about the question of where we are and where we're going as a country, but also where we're going as a city and how we think about civic engagement and the institutions that we represent. So the Thunderbird School of Global Management, Global Ties Arizona, the Chinese Chamber of Commerce, other organizations. And we heard some really interesting things. I will say, I'll call out one of the things in our conversation, Pearl, because when Tate and I got to know each other, because we came together as a faculty and a group of students to think about what Thunderbird is doing in its teaching approach, right? Because we're very good. We have a long history, 70 plus years of history in thinking about global mindset, global leadership, cross-cultural management. But I come out of the social sciences and I'm a hardcore policy person. Like I think about how to analyze. I'll talk a little bit about some of the work I've done in the past, but one of the ways that I've helped companies is by helping them understand the politics of China, right? So you can't just go in there with a good marketing idea. You got to go in there and understand who is who and what the difference between Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao and Xi Jinping is, right? You've got to understand that. And so like helping companies understand it. And so I kind of have been pushing this idea, and Tate and a couple of other students came to me and said, is there a space here in Thunderbird for having a harder edge on thinking about foreign policy? So we started the Thunderbird Foreign Policy Initiative, and we started thinking about events like this. And then we reached out to Pearl and we said, Pearl, come join us in this kickoff event. And Pearl, I think I remember you saying, you said, I'm not a China expert. Why do you want me? And it was a great comment, because what we want is a conversation, not just about U.S. China relations, but about civic engagement. I mean, think about this, Teach for America, and then doing that in the LA region, and then coming and building civic participation, public-private partnerships in the Arizona area, and then having a consulting firm that works in these spaces. Like, to me, I was like, I don't care if you're a China scholar or not. Like, I care about this kind of conversation, right? And so we are here because I'm driven by this notion of how to, as a community, have deeper conversations about U.S.-China relations, but not just experts talking to each other. In fact, I'm going to argue that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is that we leave that to the talking head pundits in Washington, D.C., and Nicholas Burns goes over and says some things. It's a disaster, right? That's not how things are going to change. Things are going to change because people come together in communities, think about economic growth in places like Phoenix, and what are the cutting edge opportunities for building fab production sites in this desert, right? Amazing, right? And so I want to be having conversations with people who care about ESG, growing up in clean, smart cities, right? And education, and how to train young students, but also how to think about civic engagement in different areas, and everything else that you all bring to the table, right? So this is a conversation, right? So that's the heart of this, and that's where we start. And thank you guys so much for being my partners in this, and thank the organizations that are partners in this too. It means so much to me. Okay, now, one quick thing. I do want to run through a couple of things, and I'm going to talk a little bit, but we also got a bunch of people online. And so for those of you who are online, if you want to talk, just butt in and talk to us. But the other thing is, I'm going to be talking fast, but it's because I want to get to a conversation. Okay. And so I do want to set up some of the key ideas that we're going to be talking about here, but getting to the conversation is more important. And if anybody's getting bored and they're like, Doug, enough, I want to go this direction, you and I overlapped in China for a long time together. And if you disagree or want to talk about something different or go down a tangent, please jump in. Okay. So those are the ground rules. So let's go quick. Any comments, thoughts, concerns, excitement? Everybody jumping out of their chairs? Yes. Yeah. All right. Yes.
After the presentation, can we go around and introduce ourselves?
Maybe we should do that now. The only thing I was worried about with that was people online, but maybe let's do it.
Let's do it.
I'll let you do it too.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do it. So we've already had Pearl. We're going to just do a quick introduction of each of our individuals who are here.
Okay, Barry Wong, Chairman of the Board of Directors, Global Ties Arizona. Professionally, native Phoenician, attorney, former state legislator, former lobbyist, and most recently, executive staff member with Governor Doug Ducey's administration, Arizona.
Awesome. So great to have you, Barry. John.
John Lee, President, Chinese Chamber of Commerce of Arizona. And we said something earlier about the chamber has been doing this for more than 10 years, team up with Songbird School. And we remember in the West Campus, 5th Avenue, we have a how to business in China over there. And then back then, the Songbird and ASU are separate schools, but now become one greater institution of higher learning. I'm so happy to be here today.
I'm Jennifer Converday. I work in mergers and acquisitions as a consultant, 91 T-Bird alum. And I'm here, not just because I'm a fan of Doug's, but I have found that I don't trust the news in terms of what's happening. I learned that as a T-Bird, the best way to get smart on a subject is to talk to experts, be part of discussions, and get involved in those conversations so you can be more informed. So I'm here for that as well.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Howdy, everybody. My name is Matthew Pepper. I'm a very recent alum. This spring, actually, I just graduated. I was a 4+1 student. Thank you. I studied Chinese language and culture in my undergraduate degree. Basically went from knowing no Chinese to semi-fluent and studied a lot of the culture and history as well. So I've always had like a special interest in the region. Just recently started a consulting firm that's focused on international expansion and sort of ESG and sustainability. And so I'm eventually looking to move in to the East Asia, Southeast Asia region. So this would be really helpful. Doing business in China is going to be a huge deal moving forward.
And you will have friends here who have struggled through the consulting firm startup thing. So yeah, talk to us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my name is Dong Chen. I'm temporary a visitor from China to visit my mother and my sisters in Phoenix. In fact, I have full experience background in China. I'm very interested to speak about opportunities about China and the U.S. opportunities right now. Thank you.
Awesome. So glad you're here. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sairam. I'm an alumni of the Thunderbird, actually. It's the undergraduate section of Thunderbird. I'll be joining Thunderbird as a master's student soon in August. But in between the few years, I worked as a business consultant, helping small and medium enterprises grow.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joe. I'm a member of a chamber, Chinese Chamber of Commerce, and I do the education part. Usually, I bring exchange students, scholars coming to the United States. I think I can do the same way. If somebody really want to take a look and experience what happened in China, maybe you can stay in China for 1 month or 2 months, even longer. Talk to me. I have a way to bring you to China as a scholar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lisa.
Hi, my name is Lisa Reichi. I'm the EVP of the Chinese Chamber of Commerce, Arizona. I'm from China originally. I've been here for over 30 years. The relationship between China and the US is very important to me. I'm glad that we're doing this seminar to help people to better understand the situation, like to do some, play a part to help improve the relationship. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. Lisa also is a master interviewer because she and Sunny showed up and said, let's talk.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Hen Zhang, and I'm an international sales consultant for our companies. Our companies design and build radar sensors, particularly for Asian market. And we have encountered very difficult time at this moment. That's the reason I'm here. Yeah.
So
really difficult times.
And thank you for bringing that up, because I want this just not to be a love in and a love fest, but actually to bring forward when people are struggling and organizations are struggling. Let's put our collective minds together. So please don't be bashful, but bring it in.
Hello, my name is Megan. I'm currently a University of Arizona student, and I'm here with my dad to learn some new stuff.
Nice. So okay. Welcome. Thank you.
你好 Jeez, come on, right?
你好，你好。
Yes. Anyway, my name is Colin England. I've spent quite a bit of time in China. I have a consulting company. I work with a number of family offices and law firms in China for Chinese individuals that come over there, high net worth individuals. So just trying to get back into things, and I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you for being here.
Hey everyone, my name is Aaron Eagles. I'm really happy to be here and hear, some of the really dedicated people to, China-US relations. I'm definitely one of them. China was my first overseas trip over probably 15 years ago. And then I have spent the past 10 years, the majority being in China and in Beijing or Tianjin area. I work a lot in art and culture. I spent the entirety of COVID in China, so that was interesting to get that perspective. China changed my life. I really owe a debt to the Chinese people. I feel like there are a lot of people in the US who have no real understanding of what China really is. And I feel like a lot of people here are wanting to be a part of sharing that story, and keeping the connections close. So I'm involved in art and culture. Right before leaving, I was supposed to do a fashion show with the Beijing embassy. COVID kind of changed that, but I love that culture is a way that even during difficult times can bring conversation. So that's me, and happy to be here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sobel Hamayan. I'm a Thunderbird alum here to support Professor Doug Guthrie. Very nice to meet you all.
Hi, my name is Mei Ling Chang. Thank you, John, introduced this meeting for me. And I have more than 30 years China business experience, but it's a long time ago. So from 2012, I came back here. And in 2005 to 2012, I was a general manager of a BMW dealership in Xinjiang. So I don't know whether people know that Xinjiang is the west province. So for me, it's I don't know whether the past experiences can help people or not, but I try to learn more the reason. I mean because I left for more than 11 years. So I stay here. But I'm welcome. I would like to learn more about the existing situation.
So tell me your name again.
Mei Ling.
So Mei Ling, I mean, just again, you all know this, but just as we document these issues, so interesting and exciting. When we hear about Xinjiang, we don't think about BMW dealerships in the Xinjiang, right? And so, but it's important to have the stories out about what's actually going on in China and all of its complexity. So beautiful. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anumoy Chatterjee. I'm a current Thunderbird student. I wanted to be a part of this current event to know the understanding of how different cultures and countries are impacting in this current market scenarios.
Raymond Tang. I'm alumni of USC, future alumni of Thunderbird, hopefully. And then my first Chinese business encounter was in 1985. Dealing with the China resources. When China resources, Huarun only have a single office in Wanzhou. And in Shanghai, there's not even a Pudong. So I'm one of the pioneers doing business in China.
Amazing. So
one more thing. My professor, Steve Rosen from USC, is my inspiration.
Okay, I know Steve. Okay, wonderful. So wonderful to have you all here. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
David Carlson, T-Bird alum.
Hi, I'm Ben Williams. I recently completed a master's in real estate development from ASU. I lived and worked in Asia for more than 15 years, 9 with JP Morgan Investment Bank. My wife is overseas Chinese. And now I'm an entrepreneur. I visited vendor relationships in China this year. This is a great forum. I'm very pleased and grateful to be invited.
Thank you for being here, Ben, and thank you for jumping in. Okay, anybody else from online? Zhao Gang, ni hao.
He's muted.
Oh, he's muted.
I can start to introduce myself.
Okay,
My
go
name is
ahead.
Nixon Lu. You can call me Lu. And I've been in the US for since 2013. So it's been a while. I went a Lululemon scholarship. Then I got the chance to study in Toronto for 1 year. That's the reason I come abroad. What I'm doing right now, I'm the financial advisor associated with non-level securities. I have a high net worth clients with strategies about how to protect their wealth, accumulate wealth, and how to eliminate taxes on the estate planning side. Looking forward to learn from all the experts here.
All right, Aaron Eagles.
That's me.
Oh, you're here. Okay, yes, you are. Li Hong.
Hello, everybody. I'm sorry. I'm already driving arrived at the meeting place, but I have some little bit small accident for my car. I'm so sorry. I just right now with my husband. His company. My English is maybe I study English more and more. I'm so sorry. I'm working in China 20 years for about pharmaceutical. Yeah, and right now I come here. I just study English and find the chance to make some business in the future. Thank you, everybody. I'm so sorry.
You're great. Thank you, Brian Xiaohong. Okay, Ed. How about?
I was not prepared for video. Greetings from San Diego. I'm tuning in just to hopefully increase my knowledge. I am currently a guest professor at Harvard Institute of Technology and a visiting senior lecturer at Peking University Business School, HSBC in Shenzhen. And I go back and forth on a frequent basis. I'm about to go back to Harbin in a couple more weeks to teach for 2 weeks there. Thank you. Looking forward to learning something.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. How about Kowei Chen? Dominic?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dominic Pertura, tuning in from my hometown, Barrington, Illinois tonight. But I am here committed to the cause. It's been an honor to work with Professor Guthrie and Tate to get the Thunderbird Foreign Policy Initiative off the ground here in recent months. And I'm very excited to see our first event here tonight.
Okay, and how about Iwa Yatoji?
Is that me?
Yes. Sorry.
It's okay. By the way, my name, they think sometimes it's Chinese. I'm Aya from Tunisia. I'm currently residing in Saudi Arabia. I've taken some course with Thunderbird, and I'm here because I would like some insights about the U.S. China dynamics, because it's a bit exaggerated.
Okay. All right. I'm going to just dive in because I think we're short on time, and it's so great to meet you all. Welcome to you all, the new people here. Thank you for coming. But again, I'm going to talk for a few minutes because I just want to sort of set the tone for a couple of things and give you a little bit of background about myself. But mostly I want to be here for a conversation. So what we're going to do is run through very quickly what it is that I want to set the tone with. Then we're going to ask Tate and Pearl to come up here, and we're going to sort of be like a panel. But what we're really doing is having an interactive dialogue, an interactive conversation with you. I am going to give you my thesis here, and then I'll run through a little bit about why I've come to this conclusion. But as I sort of mentioned in the beginning, I believe U.S.-China relations are at the most difficult point that I've imagined them in the last 30 years that I've been watching this. My first time living in China was in 1994 in Shanghai. So I'm a 30-year veteran at this point. Woohoo! And China. And
simultaneous interpretation.
Like a couple of other people have said, China is my life. China sort of saved my life. It gave me a life. I didn't know, if you would have asked me when I was 18 years old, was I going to be a China scholar teaching at Thunderbird some 30 years later? I wouldn't have known that, right? I was just going to go to the University of Chicago and study economics so I could go work at McKinsey and then maybe get into politics. That was my idea. And I had a roommate who dared me to take Chinese. He said I was afraid. And I said, I'll show you, I'll take Chinese. And that first year in intensive Chinese changed my life. It changed my heart. You know what I'm talking about, right? It just changed my life, right? And suddenly I was just like, this entire new world was opened up to me. And I had to get on a plane and go to Shanghai, or go, at the time I went to Taiwan. This was in 1989. And then I went to graduate school to study the transformation of the Chinese economy and was living in China and living the dream in Shanghai in 1994. And so that was the year of Clinton's engagement agreement. That was the year, you'll remember, when we started to have a path towards China becoming a member of the WTO. That was the year when I was like, oh my goodness, okay, we are partners. We are coming together to do this together, right? We're partners, right? And so we sort of rode that wave. And I was a young assistant professor at New York University, and I was so excited because here I was not just doing work and writing a dissertation and doing research on China, but I was getting invited to Washington to sit with Senator Paul Wellstone to help advise people on how to get China into the WTO. Wow. What a dream for a little guy, right? And it really did feel like for the next decade, China enters the WTO in 2001. It really felt to me like we were all on a path together, right? We are together and we are working, we are growing and becoming partners, and ultimately the most important trading partners in the world, right? Back then, when Deng Xiaoping came to the United States in 1979, China had 850 million people living in poverty. Right? But Deng Xiaoping came to visit Jimmy Carter and Jingji Kaifang, right? We are opening the doors. It's time for us to work together. We need to learn from you, right? And so we went on this path, and then China enters the WTO in 2001, and the world just seems like it's open and developing. And then for the next 16 years, it's felt like that. It felt like a very, very close relationship and partnership, where we're increasingly interdependent. China becomes the number 2 economy in the world. And we seem like we're on a good path. And then, in my opinion, things started to break down in 2016. And I don't think we need to get into politics of why that happened, but I do think that it's really important to understand. And Lisa, you asked me this, like, what was the issue? Why did it happen? And I think, America is a very proud nation. Right? And we have a very big idea about being the most powerful economy in the world. Somebody asked me this morning on one of my calls. I have a team in Shanghai, and she was helping me prep for this. And she was like, well, what is so different? Like, why was it so different when Kissinger came to China in 1972, or when Deng Xiaoping came to Washington in 1979? And I thought for a second, and I said, well, what was so different is that the United States got to sit in its haughty position of like, we're the best. We're the greatest economy in the world, and we'll help you. Yes. We don't do nearly as well when there's a competitor who is going to surpass us as the largest economy in the world. Make no mistake about it. That's one of my very clear predictions. I know some people, Pearl, you might even question my sense of how strong the Chinese economy is, but I have my reasons for why I think this. But China will be the largest economy in the world in about 5 years, right? And the US is going to have to deal with that, right? We have an economy that is the second largest economy in the world right now. It will be the largest economy in the world. And we also have issues that are about a trade imbalance, right? And there are real reasons for why that trade imbalance exists, but it does. And so then the question is, what are we going to do? Are we going to get into an economic Cold War? No, that is going to be bad for everybody. And it is going to be especially bad for the United States, in my opinion. And so what we need to do is we need to start to think about, okay, we can't just leave this to Washington. This isn't just Washington, Beijing talking anymore. This is us. This is us in our institutions, Thunderbird, the Chinese Chamber of Commerce, Global Ties. This is us talking about what it is that is going to be the creative solution of how we engage, how we continue to build partnership relationships, right? And so that's really what I want this conversation to be about. And again, this isn't me here to lecture at you. This is me sharing what my stories are and where my experiences come from, but us having a collective conversation where we might disagree about some things, and that's awesome. It's not just fine, that's awesome. But what is really important is that we put our creative thinking caps on, as my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Bardolis, would always say, put on your creative thinking cap and be creative. Like, let's think about public-private partnerships, civic engagement, smart cities. Let's think about the different ways that we can actually build this conversation in a very, very effective way, okay? So that's my agenda for the next bit of time. I'm going to just run through a couple more points, but again, please, 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 if anything you disagree with or anything you're getting bored with listening to me talk, just put your hand up, or don't even put your hand up and just jump in. But let me just go through a couple of quick things here, because I want to give you a little bit of a sense of sort of where I get my ideas from and why I believe what I believe. Okay. So I went through this journey. I've already talked about my journey, so we don't have to go through this much more. The one piece of my journey that I didn't talk about, so after I was a professor at NYU, and then got to do some time on, working in Washington and helping China get into the WTO and doing that kind of advisory work, I was a dean of a business school for a while, the George Washington University School of Business. And that was so exciting for me because here I was, China scholar, business school dean, and in Washington, D.C. So we get to talk about like U.S. China relations, da, 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 da. It didn't work out so well, and I ended up exiting that job earlier than I thought I would, which was painful. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do with my career? And I got a call from this company called Apple. And it was such an interesting moment because here I was in academia, but I was so thirsty to get back into the field. My identity as a China scholar is as somebody who studies economics and loves to run numbers, loves to do econometric analysis, but I really believe in talking to people. I really believe that you can't really understand what's going on without having deep knowledge and conversations and engagement with people on the ground. And so being back in China for Apple was fascinating, but it was also fascinating because this was the beginning of a new era, right? So we have China entering the WTO in 2001. And that's the era of Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao. It's the end of the Jiang Zemin era. And suddenly the markets are kind of wide open, right? And that's when Apple entered China. And there was no rules. It's like, whatever you want to do, just go do it. Go make money, right? And when President Xi came to power, it was very clearly going to be a different tone, right? And it was very interesting for me, again, as somebody who loves foreign policy and loves sort of talking to people. It's not just about how good your product is, right? And it was very interesting when I was leaving academia and talking to Tim Cook about coming to work for Apple. There was a really interesting thing that happened that should have been the signal. So Xi Jinping was inaugurated on March 14th, 2013. Anybody know what March 15th of every year in China is? Anybody? Consumer Day. Consumer Day is the day that ever since Deng Xiaoping, the government has stepped up to say, let's just get one corporation's attention to let them know that they can't, 不可以这样子, right? Let's just pick one every year. And March 15th, 2013, guess who it was? It was Apple, right? And so as I'm talking to Tim Cook, I'm like, you guys, they got your attention, right? Right? And he's like, it's fine. We pour so much money into this country. We create so many jobs. It's fine. Don't worry about it. And I had a sense it wasn't fine. And then I joined Apple shortly thereafter, and it wasn't fine, right? And so it became a real educational opportunity. So the company that puts the most money into China in the world, and by the way, has had a hidden partnership that was so deep, but they just weren't telling anybody about it, had to be educated on how to actually engage with China in a much more effective way. And so they are one of the key players that I draw a lot of my knowledge from, because it gave me a frontline understanding and frontline appeal to what was actually happening. But it also gave me a deeper sense that we are married, right? Our two economies cannot do without each other. It drives me crazy when people say, well, Foxconn just built a plant in Chennai. We can make iPhones there, right? No, that is not how it works. And I'll tell you about some of the statistics that I learned about when I was doing that job. But we're married. Our two economies, our two countries are not just together because there's some convenient production. It would be a disaster for both economies if we decided we couldn't work together. And so it's not an option, right? And so then we get to the point of what is the creative solution for how we all figure out how to work together. And here again, I believe it's not Washington, Beijing. This is city level solutions, right? This is Phoenix, and anybody know what Phoenix sister city is? Chengdu. Tempe, and anybody know what Tempe's sister city is? Zhenjiang. Yes, look at you, okay. I had this funny moment when I was in a lot of my research. I go out and I just like to talk to cities. I like to talk to second and third tier cities, not the Shanghais and Beijings of the world. And so I like to go out to places like Zhenjiang and interview the director of the Bureau of Commerce, right? And so I was interviewing the director of the Bureau of Commerce in Zhenjiang, and he knew so much. He was talking about ASU. He was talking about Thunderbird. He was talking about leadership development. He was talking about all of these things. He's like, I want you to come back and do a leadership development. When I left with my research partner, I was like, was that weird? That was strange, right? And he was like, that was really weird. And then, of course, we go and find out, which shame on us, we didn't know, but Zhenjiang and Tempe have been sister cities since 1989. Of course he knew, right? He's been waiting for person-to-person engagement and exchanges to start this relationship. And so I just believe that these kinds of dynamics and these kind of relationships can happen, right? Okay. Now, let me just go into my main thesis, and then let's have a conversation. So my main thesis here again is that I've already done the sister city stuff. The main thesis is that, we have somebody here, is that China's economy is going to surpass the U.S. economy as the largest economy in the world. It's probably going to happen in, I don't know, 2030, something like that. Yeah. Do you think 2030?
Yes, you.
Yeah. So that's going to happen. Now, Earl was sort of talking to
little person.
Yeah. What's happening here? So that's going to happen. But that being said, the issue of how intertwined our economies are, I think, becomes so fundamental. And here's where, and I want to put you on the spot in a second, Pearl, because when I said to you and Tate, the economic fundamentals of China are so strong. I just think, and I have a very specific view on why I think that's true. But Pearl, you immediately challenged me on that issue, and you said, I'm not so sure that's true, or we learned something else. So let me put you on the spot and you jump in.
Well, I'm just coming at it from a very student perspective. I'm literally taking the class right now, evaluating global and regional business environments. And so rather than hear what we hear on the news and go with it, our professor literally challenges us to look up their current, inflation rate, gross domestic product, their trade balance, their current account balance. I mean, we have to look up everything and then actually make a case using the data. So, I mean, my comment was simply that was just around China's kind of overcapacity issue around their exports being so much higher than their current domestic consumer demand. And how do we resolve that? Is that a challenge for China? What does that turn into?
Okay, I have some thoughts on this, but before I jump into them, anybody else have views on where the two economies are? Is anybody worried about where the Chinese economy is or have bullish views like I do? Any thoughts?
I'm not very worried about it in the sense that I kind of saw this coming as well from the 2016 election. What followed. I know we don't want to get political, but from what followed and the policies that were put on and the sanctions that were put on China, I'm not surprised that we're going to even out and then eventually narrow out at some point.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
I just had questions about like labor force issues like moving forward. Like we all kind of know like the 421 kind of problem exists for like a lot of young people in China, as well as there's social movements like the Life Lab movement or Let It Rot, right? And like I understand that we are working on like AI and automation, which could help a lot of the healthcare issues and the employment issues, but just some of those issues worry me about like the future of the economy.
Okay. Other comments?
I have one comment. The GDP growth rate is much faster in China than US. A lot of times I hear, oh, is this a real number? How do you know the number we heard is the real number? So how do you know, what's the real GDP growth in China?
Okay, so I'm going to just jump in because I'm going to lose track here in my head, but we have a couple of really important different issues. But first, I'm going to take your point, Lisa. This is something that we hear often when we talk about the numbers in China. And like, oh my God, well, we know that people are just lying. They're just making up data. And how can we trust the data anyway? Personally, at this point in 2024, I reject that argument, right? And so it may have been the case in the early 1980s that the Tongjijiu was kind of a little fuddling with statistics and probably was the case, okay? Like we've been there, we've seen it. Not today. Not today. If you spend time analyzing data and analyzing statistics, I have a team in China where we do a lot of work on second and third tier cities. We have so many different data sources for how we track our data and we check all the data. I'm quite confident that the State Statistical Bureau is not lying about their data. Now, just to give you an example of one thing that came up recently, after the Q1 numbers came in, I got a bunch of calls from people saying like, well, it looked like China was going to come in at 4.9 and then they hit 5.4, just like they said they wanted. They must be manipulating the numbers, right? And here, I'm going to make the case that no, they are not manipulating numbers in terms of lying about statistics. But what they do is actually quite interesting. And I think it's tied to what the strength of the Chinese economy is, right? So China's economy is not a Jeffrey Sachs free market or Milton Friedman free market, open competition, let everybody fight it out, right? It's not a centrally planned system either, right? Beijing does come out with 5-year plans, and those 5-year plans are passed down with targets for local officials who act like directors in organizations, right? But I think the best analogy, I love Andy Walder's work where he talks about local governments as industrial firms. I actually think the better analogy is China as the world's largest multinational corporation. Why do I say that? Because the ways in which China HQ sets 5-year plans, there are numbers attached to them. All of the directors of the bureaus of commerce all over the country are all having KPIs that are tied to their achievement of those numbers, where it acts in the ways that are relevant for what you're saying. So they looked like they were going to have 4.9 and they got 5.4. That's because there are a lot of levers to push, right? So Changzhou is leading the world in solar panels, right? Solar panels are down right now. Let's get Shenyang to up its output of EV batteries and lithium because we need to flood the markets, and let's get steel up, right? So there are lots of levers to push that make China act like a very complex multinational corporation, but it's not fudging numbers. It's not lying about statistics. It's just saying like we have a lot of data that we can push around and push so we can up production. Now, when Janet Yellen then comes over and says like, why are you flooding markets? You're trying to... Well, of course, Janet, like that's the way market economies work, right? We're outproducing you and we're winning. Right. And so that just gives you a sense of one is the numbers and the data. You talked about the labor issues, right? Tell me your name again. Matthew. So the labor issues are a big concern for a lot of people, right? Because a lot of people say Well, my goodness, what happened? And this is, I think, a very interesting thing about China and the ways in which policy happens, right? So in 1988, when they brought in the one-child policy, I think they thought, well, we have to do this because we have so many excess people and we have people living in abject poverty. So let's control population growth. Let's have the one-child policy. What they didn't account for at the time is that what the notion of a family would become culturally embedded. So in 2016, when they're like, okay, we're out of that problem, let's tell people they can have kids again, people suddenly were like, no, my idea of a family is two parents, 4 grandparents, and a child, 4-2-1. And so they have been running into an issue, and there have been a lot of questions in the demographic data about, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? We're 30 years away from that problem, right? There's still such a population bubble in the rural areas, and a lot of that group of people are still impoverished that we're not at any place yet where China's going to be struggling with the population downturn such that it's going to hurt production. The other thing that's really interesting about China that most people don't realize is that the government is very much involved in the migrant labor force, right? So the migrant labor force is moved around by the government. And so it becomes this is not a free market, but in my opinion, in a good way. Because what this means is that people who need to be making a move from rural areas and where they're impoverished and where people have multiple children into areas where heavy manufacturing production are working, they get moved in and moved back. And so, Matthew, I'm just not worried about that population issue for at least the next 30 years. I think that's not China's problem. Now, Pearl, to your question, the question of what about the ways in which we analyze the data of overproduction versus export versus import. And these are real issues, I think. But in my opinion, the real questions about the strength of China's economy really has to do with, if you look at the United States and China, I'm much more worried about the U.S. economy than the Chinese economy. Why do I say that? So a lot of people worry about, when I don't want to get political here, but when we think about the difficult situation we're in this country right now, politically, who do you blame? I'm not going to say somebody who's running for president. I'm going to say Milton Friedman. I blame Milton Friedman. Why do I blame Milton Friedman? Because Milton Friedman came in as the leader of neoclassical economic theory, Chicago School of Economics, and he said, just let the markets decide. It's awesome, right? And by the way, we should stop taxing corporations so much and just let whoever's going to win. And basically what happened is, what you would have in a free market society is that a lot of places went to where labor is cheaper. The number one exporter from China to the United States is who? Walmart, right? Walmart is actually over in China getting cheaper labor, which is fine. That's how free markets work. That's what Milton Friedman argued. But what has happened, so the US economy kept track with growth, but we have shifted 38% of the wealth that was for working and middle class families in union jobs up to the upper 5% of society, right? And so our economy has remained strong because of high-end services. We've got a lot of lawyers, a lot of accountants, a lot of consultants, and all that's great, right? But we've replaced all of those jobs, well, a lot of those jobs with minimum wage jobs at Walmart, right? And so this is where I think, now in the case of China, we have the most powerful and sophisticated manufacturing supply chain in the world. Maybe Germany's manufacturing supply chain rivals it in terms of its manufacturing prowess, but it's tiny, right? And this, again, I am so happy about the time I had at Apple because I was able to see firsthand. Apple is the most profitable company in the world, not because of Steve Jobs. Apple is the most profitable company in the world because of Tim Cook, and he's a manufacturing supply chain genius. He is the person who built the integrated nature of the manufacturing supply chain in China, right, for Apple. And so like when you start to think about just how that was done, yes, it's Tim Cook's genius, but it's also it's also China's building of that manufacturing supply chain that is not going anywhere for the next 30 years. So to your question, Pearl, yes, there are issues on export and import balance and, whether or not the consumption economy is as big as it could be or should be. Those things are issues, but in my opinion, they're small issues when you compare them to the economic fundamentals of a manufacturing economy that the whole world is going to continue to need.
So can I build on one of
Please.
your things? Because you mentioned you blame Milton Friedman for this free market theory. Do you think the US is a loser in this free market?
Oh, a loser. It depends. I don't love to, this, I always evade questions. So I don't love the ideas of winners and losers per se, but there are definitely groups of people that have been hurt by that process. And I don't believe any economies can really be open free market economies. And besides the US, let me just take the example, right? When the former Soviet bloc and China were going through an economic reform, the Berlin Wall falls in 1989, and then there's this whole movement towards radical economic transformation of the former Soviet bloc, right? Jeff Sachs, who was an acolyte of Milton Friedman, and Janusz Kornai argued shock therapy. Just privatize everything, let the markets go. It'll be awesome, right? China said, no, we actually have to gradually manage this process and actually build manufacturing strengths and pockets in different places and plan for. So we're not planning in terms of what people are going to produce. We are incentivizing the directors of those bureaus of commerce, but we're going to have a plan that really kind of thinks through this process. Who's the loser? The loser is the Soviet bloc and Russia. The winner is China. And so now in the US case, our economy is still strong, but I think a lot of people who had manufacturing jobs in the Midwest and the Northeast, they have suffered. And so I'm not a fan of neoclassical economic theory, which usually shocks people because they're like, you went to Chicago. How can you not be a fan of neoclassical economic
We're
theory? But I studied Chinese literature there. So. Other comments, questions, directions to take this? Matthew.
I guess clarifying kind of like what we were just talking about. So like your opinion is that the advanced industrial economy sort of makes up for any sort of export glut that's happening right now or may happen in the future because of weakening consumer demand here in the US because like everybody needs manufacturing and like this is sort of the most sophisticated and largest integrated network. So is it like on a fundamental level, they're going to be okay regardless of sort of macroeconomics?
Well, they're going to be okay for two reasons. One is that, yes, you need an economic basis that caters to multiple layers of economic productivity, right? And again, in the US, we've seen economic productivity in the manufacturing supply chain just dwindle to almost nothing, right? And we've seen that replaced with high-end service sector economy and low-end service sector, right? And so that to me is just harmful to an economy. You can still grow at you can still have the largest economy in the world and be as anemic as we are in manufacturing supply chain, but people are going to be hurt, right? And so in the case of China, I think that one, the economic fundamentals of the manufacturing supply chain are just so powerful. And this is where the gradual planning and the creation of a political economy of innovation at the local governments as industrial firms level is so powerful. But they need to continue to develop a high-end service sector economy. And we're seeing that happen at a pretty good pace in China. They need a real estate market, and they've had real estate bubbles, right? And building in those areas. They need infrastructure, which they've built and they're continuing to build. And so I just think when you put all of those things together, China's economy is going to be fine, and the predicted rates of growth at about 4 to 5% over the next decade are reasonable, right? There's still just a lot of growth to be had there. And then I think in the US, we're going to see growth rates that are maintaining at around 3%, and that's where the numbers of 2030 come from. Does that make sense? Other comments, questions, thoughts? Okay. Yeah, please, Jen.
Just one comment as you were talking, it reminded me of when I worked in corporate and I had the opportunity to do an event in Shanghai. And we were in a joint venture. So I was working with a company called Navtech, Navigation Technologies, which does digital mapping. And we had a digital map of the world and we're putting on an event in China. The reason why I bring this up is I had the opportunity to talk with the leader who was running the Chinese side of our joint venture. And I remember very vividly a comment that he made about how the joint venture was going and where we were in that dynamic. And our American team was very frustrated. They felt that short term, we weren't seeing the numbers. It wasn't turning around. This joint venture wasn't working. And the gentleman said to me, Jennifer, Americans think very short term. We think in dynasties. And had such a profound impact on my thinking of, so even your numbers there, they don't shock me. To me, it's a reinforcement of perspective in terms of a short-term tendency that Americans, it's not just the Chinese who have accused us of worked globally. But it's just, this conversation is reminding me of that particular moment of thinking in dynasties, and the impact that has is we're willing to wait. We're here in the long game. Yeah. And it's a very different perspective.
So I love that perspective, and thank you for bringing that up, Jennifer, just because, yes, for those of us who have studied China for a long time and are China scholars, we know like about the hundreds and even thousands of years of history where we talk about these epochs and dynasties. All of that is true. I would push it one level to a much more contained set of this discussion, though. In my opinion, and again, forgive me for giving away my my economic coat here, but I just think one of the most toxic thing about capital markets is quarterly earnings. I just think like this is just not the way to.
It's not even quarterly anymore. I think it's weekly.
Well, yes, and
having worked in corporate,
and I have learned in this position to be very careful about who I say about when, but I've already gotten in trouble with Apple too many times, and so I'll just say what's on my mind. Even the people there that are sort of the great innovators, you know, people I respected tremendously, like Tim Cook, they're obsessed with quarterly earnings because they're all compensated with share options, and the options vest. And, you know, like it drives me crazy. Now, why is that relevant for China? So again, to take this away from dynasties, and one of the things that you see in this theory that we have, that my team's producing on local governments as industrial firms, is we spend a lot of time thinking about, like, yes, you have publicly traded corporations and companies are concerned about their quarterly earnings, but Chinese officials, the leaders, if you think about the directors of the bureaus of commerce as leaders of a business unit within the Chinese multinational corporation, they think about the ecosystem, right? And so they say, like, yeah, we might take a hit on the quarterly earnings over here right now, but what we're doing is we're trying to build the entire ecosystem of Zhejiang province, right? And we're trying to make Zhejiang province the most powerful place in the world for lithium batteries and electric vehicles, right? And so, like, how do we shape this ecosystem? So then this is why I don't like free market economics, is because you compete with each other and compete out of business. Whereas when you have a mindset where you're all thinking like an ecosystem, you might pull away from the idea of quarterly earnings right now, because for the ecosystem right now, this is going to make electric batteries in Zhejiang province powerful as a whole. And so it's not to the dynasty mindset that you're talking about, but it is a longer term mindset than quarterly. And that, I think, is just powerful.
Well, and the reason why I bring it up in the context of this conversation is I would not have had that insight. You know, I was coming from Chicago, where NAVTech was based, going to China, and hearing that comment made me realize they didn't care about quarterly earnings. It was about the long game. And I think I would say a good percentage of Americans are informed by what comes through in the news, what they read. I wouldn't have had that insight had I not had that conversation, and it shaped how I thought. It's how I did events in China in the future. I was better prepared because of starting to understand how they were thinking about things. And so I just say that because Americans have a language of short term, you know, here's what we're hitting, this is what it is. And when you start to learn their perspective and their willingness to wait out a lot longer, I think it informs how they're operating policy wise, that I wouldn't have had that perspective. So your comment of, It's not DC and Beijing. It'll be other people who have that perspective because they're getting it from a more informed source than just here's how we've always done it and here's how you're going to do it too, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and to that point, again, just to extend it a little bit, again, not DC, Beijing. This is local to local economic development in different areas. Now, Phoenix is so interesting right now because, you know, TSMC's here. We're building fab factories in the desert. Fascinating, right? And this is a key point in the next phase of critical economic development, the semiconductor industry and the CHIPS Act and all of this stuff is really, really important. In my opinion, again, we are dealing with an integrated set of economies. We need to get along with our largest trading partner. And we need to deal in this complex geopolitical ecosystem of how to build this. The thing that's really interesting to me here, and having watched, again, with Tim Cook and Apple on the ground and the building of industrial clusters and manufacturing supply chains, there's a lot of knowledge in China that can help us in building the right type of industrial clusters and the right type of manufacturing supply chain in the desert here in Phoenix, right? And so I just think that there's an interesting opportunity to really think of this in a collaborative way rather than a competitive way.
So I'm not sure if you are following, because I work really closely in the semiconductor industry. So a couple of years ago, the United States restricted semiconductor equipment to being that produces the most advanced chips to they restricted them from selling any companies from selling US based any semiconductor equipment that uses US technology from being sold into China. And then they also restricted the sale of the most advanced semiconductor chips into China. So TSMC, for example, right now cannot sell to China any chips that are smaller than, I think it's like 7 nanometers or something. So that's happening. And it's around national security, which, in my opinion, I think that is one of the real issues. I think the concern, though, is like potentially the domino effect that it could occur and create where we're creating issues. Because I think there's the piece of national security that I do think we have to be worried about. But then when the tariffs come and all these restrictions come, then it starts to potentially get into the space of the broader interconnected manufacturing supply chain that Doug is talking about that could really harm American business owners and consumers. So I think there's kind of two things going on there that we need to be really careful that we are just talking about national security and not sort of blanket, putting restrictions on like everything related to manufacturing. But the semiconductor collaboration, I don't think is in the near future of being resolved. Like, I don't think we're gonna get that back anytime soon.
So let me push you on that, but also ask the room. Are there ways that, I don't know if it's lobbying or advising, or are there ways that we can bring people along towards a more collaborative mindset for thinking about these kinds of key issues, or do you just think it's off the table for now?
Well, I think that so in my experience, when you want to try to make a win, when there's all these kinds of, like you said earlier, Washington politics, right? These big factors that feel like we can't really impact them. It does start more like where there could be an easier win-win situation. I'm just saying that semiconductors and national security is probably not that area. Like, we probably need to start win-win in something different than semiconductors. But I definitely think that there are areas that we could. And I think that maybe starts with like talking to our economic development agencies at the state and regional level and seeing which Chinese companies are actually in the pipeline. Like, just to get really tactical, like who are they actually talking to right now that are Chinese companies? And how could we potentially partner with them? But I don't think that us starting with trying to overturn the US policies banning semiconductor chips is probably where we should start, because that would, suck up all the energy in the room and feel like a bit of an uphill battle. But manufacturing in general, like more aspects of manufacturing, I absolutely think so.
Okay. Any follow-up thoughts or opinions on this? Because I love this line of thinking. I love this line of thinking of tactically picking, okay, we're not going to win the semiconductor battle right now, and the CHIPS Act is the CHIPS Act, right? But there are other aspects of building an effective manufacturing supply chain. So let me give you an example. One of the reasons I love where I am at Thunderbird, and I'm not just saying this because I'm in a room and we might go on tape or somebody might quote me. I really believe that Michael Crow is the most important university president in the country right now, right? For many years, right? Because he came to ASU and he started to think first, like education, we should be about opening the doors, right? We shouldn't be about rankings based on exclusionary aspects of, everybody knows that's the way the U.S. News and World Report rankings work, right? U.S. News and World Report rankings, the more exclusive you are, the higher you go in the rankings, right? So if you have a 1% acceptance rate, you're up there with Harvard. And if you have a high acceptance rate, you're down below. And Michael Crow's there saying, open the doors, right? Education is for everybody. So how are you going to move up in the ranking? Well, let's convince U.S. News and World Report to start ranking universities on innovation. What's the university that was #1 in innovation over the last 9 years? ASU, right? So think about that, right? And by the way, when I was there in December in Zhenjiang, I can't tell you how many people said to me, including the director of the Bureau of Commerce in Zhenjiang, like ASU, #1 in innovation, right? He knew that. Yes. Now, why do I bring this up? To your point, Pearl, okay, we might not win the battle over the CHIPS Act
right now,
but we can think about what makes manufacturing supply chains strong, right? And this is one of the ways that China has been so powerful, is because China didn't just say like, oh, we have 300 million people who are poor, we'll put them to work for very cheap, right? No, they also created a vocational technical educated labor force that could actually handle the management of Apple's very complex manufacturing supply lines and their suppliers, right? By the way, when TSMC has, been in the news over the last year in building their fab sites, the big concern has been, do you guys have the vocational technical labor force to manage the manufacturing supply lines in fab sites, right? What university is moving so aggressively in the training of vocational technical labor force? ASU. Right. So again, you start to think about these things, to your point, Pearl, we might not win the CHIPS Act right now, but we might be able to think about like, okay, well, if we have an entire labor force that needs to be trained in this aspect of line management for chips manufacturing, let's make sure they are, but maybe they also need leadership development training, right? Maybe they need to actually figure out how to be managers, right? And so I think that there are lots of different ways that we as a community can start to think about skill sets at Thunderbird, right? Skill sets at ASU, skill sets at different places. Maybe Sogomayan, they need to be trained online, right? You have Ed Plus has an online training program with Starbucks and with Walmart. Is that right? With Uber. Maybe we need that for manufacturing supply chain as well, right? And so like there are ways that I think we can think about this tactically. Does that make sense, Pearl, in terms of?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think the direct like person to person and institution to institution partnership is a really good way to go. The Arizona Commerce Authority here recently has signed an MOU with South Korea. Not so long ago, they signed one with Taiwan. Like they've been doing direct business and partnership. And it might be a good time to think about what that looks like with China. Like the whole you mentioned Foxconn earlier, like Foxconn is the maker of iPhones. But like, I think the American idea that we're going to diversify the manufacturing supply chain so that we don't need to rely on China is like not really a reality, right? Like we can't diversify fast enough to replace China. So we still need a relationship, in my opinion, right? But I think we have, the the political sentiment and the threat around like national security is a real one, and it's not just going to go away.
For sure.
So we have to figure out like how we continue to have a manufacturing relationship with China, while we're also protecting our national security. And so I think the best way to do that is not to go through like, the kind of political route, right? It's the direct connection to like our businesses can do business with your businesses. That would be my take. Yeah.
I'd love to jump in there.
So go ahead, John.
A really interesting anecdote to that is how much interest it raised the last, 7 years or so. But prior to the last 7 years, there was an incredible amount of interest that was building both from the United States and from China on investments, on bilateral investments. And if you take, for example, like Select USA, right, an annual conference that brings people in from all around the world.
Yeah.
The number one delegation every year over year was the Chinese delegation.
Yeah.
And on the other side were the economic developers locally that we would take hundreds at a time around China to different cities to introduce them to Chinese companies. The interest is strong.
Yeah.
Understanding, locally. I mean, Arizona is a great example. GPEC is another really great organization here that did a lot of really good work between China and the United States,
Yeah.
China,
Yeah.
Taiwan,
And I think that good work has paid off. I mean, I think GPEC and we Select USA just happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there was a lot of interest from Chinese companies.
Yeah, third largest delegation this year.
Perhaps less of a drop off than others are seeing. But the foreign direct investment from China to the US and US to China like significantly dropped over the last 4 years.
And what I think is so important is that we figure out how to rekindle those conversations. And I don't think that happens at the national level, right?
Right.
It's the great anecdotes, the stories of Chinese investment in the United States, where they are reshaping and building communities and creating jobs, high-paying manufacturing jobs in the United States. Those are the conversations that drive us forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. And those are also the stories that'll win over hearts and minds, like from the political standpoint, because right now all everybody's hearing is all the bad stuff, right? So, but we have a business owner over here, he's just stepped out, but like it is the small businesses, the medium-sized business, like and businesses that are creating jobs for Americans. I don't know if we realize how much like some of these trade war issues might impact the American consumer, this American small business, right? Those are the hidden things that aren't getting talked about.
It's intriguing to me that how little the U.S. public understands that a 25% tariff really means a 25% increase on the price of a product. Right.
On this issue, sorry to interrupt, John, but like I would love for us all to walk away from the room with an agreement. Like, okay, I got it. We're not going to win the argument over the CHIPS Act, but anytime somebody brings up tariffs being good for America, like, can we please just beat that back? Like, like tariffs do not hurt China. They do not hurt Chinese companies. Walmart is the number one exporter from China to the United States, and that money goes directly into the prices of American consumers. Like it's just bad.
I mean, the other thing that's happening is China is just they're just manufacturing in other places and rebranding it, repackaging it, and is still selling it to the United States.
In Mexico, right? I mean,
yeah.
Do you want to take some comments from our friends on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Barrett. Sure. Comments online. Anybody?
Is mute on? Is your mute on?
You're able to unmute. Maybe they can all mute themselves.
Anybody online?
Also raise their hands. People can raise their hands. Might be hard to.
Okay. So I got a couple more things but Kate, I'm going to put you on the spot in a second. So, but again, I actually think that these are really, really interesting arguments and conversations. And I love, Pearl, that you said us, in thinking straight about like, are we going to win the big political arguments? Probably not. But can we win arguments about continued economic engagement and collaboration, and the fact that while tariffs, I think we can all agree are bad, hopefully we all agree, investment is good, right? Investment that helps us build manufacturing supply chains And so the reason I raised Foxconn is, you know, we got TSMC here. Why are we not inviting Foxconn to build a final assembly plant here? Why Chennai? Well, labor's cheaper in Chennai, but maybe there should be economic incentives for them to build here so they can do a final assembly of iPhones here, right? And help build that manufacturing supply chain in a really powerful industrial cluster that reflects what it is that's overseas. The other story I love to tell here, you know, if I had my choice of one company that we should go invite, it would be Lens. Does anybody know what Lens is? Anybody ever hear the name Zhou Chunfei? Zhou Chunfei is the richest woman in China. And the reason I love the company Lens is because often, I mean, we would have this conversation at Apple all the time. What's so great about this? What revolutionized this in 2007? Touchscreen glass, right? We no longer had BlackBerries with keyboards, right? Touchscreen glass, that was the major revolution. Now, Steve Jobs would tell you, and anybody who still works at Apple would say, yeah, we invented that. We invented that in Cupertino. We are the ones. And they did. There were engineers in Cupertino who invented the idea of touchscreen glass so you can do this, right? Sad thing is, that's not the point. You can invent anything. The question is, can you produce 1 million a week? And you can't do that in Cupertino, right? And you can't do it in Foxconn, right? And so I got to know Zhou Chunfei when I was over at Apple because she was just fascinating to me. And she's the reason that we have this. Not because some engineers in Cupertino, it's because Jeff Williams got on a plane and slept on the floor of her factory with her sleeping on the floor in a sleeping bag at her factory for 2 months until they figured out how to mass produce touchscreen glass, right? And I love that story because that's the thing, right? It's not just about what can you invent, it's how can you innovate to produce, right? And so I would love Zhou Chunfei. And so one of the things that is always in my secret ideas is like, let's invite the people that nobody's ever heard of, right? Like, let's get Zhou Chunfei over here. And like, let's not get Wang Yi over here. Let's get Justin Lin, right? Let's get people who actually, you know, are influential voices and can go deep with helping us think about how to build this powerful manufacturing supply chain in the desert in Arizona, right? And so I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Tate, but we've been talking a lot about the economy and specific aspects of economic development in the manufacturing supply chain. I'm such a fan of the work you've told me about that you did about smart cities and how to think about the ways in which you bring a city together to think about not just public-private partnerships in the areas of education and places like that, but also in innovative stuff around AI and clean energy. Talk to us about that and how that could relate to what we're talking about here.
So my experience is mostly in Dallas. I was a part of a project that did the fastest to market smart city initiative in maybe a 6x6 block. And there were multiple different types of technologies that would sensor for environmental issues and collect data on that space. I spoke to my director or like my client today about, you know, what do we have to learn from China in how we develop cities? And, you know, she had mentioned like the data is an issue, like we do need to be worried and questioning it, but they're so far along in surveillance and security. So that's something that we can learn. I also think because of how China's government is structured, they have a lot of control over their policies. And it was really unique in Dallas that we kind of had a lot of synergies between city, historic districts, different private public relationships. But I think that we could go to create Chinese relationships city to city and learn about like how do you do the development so quickly, incorporating technology into the city. I also think another thing that I spoke to my client about was and we've mentioned it now, but it's the foreign direct investment. Like if we have Chinese businesses coming and investing in our cities, then they too are married to our success. So I've said a lot, but I would love to, I think that Phoenix has a great opportunity. Like if we were to reduce policies and increase incentives for federal investment, there's so much potential.
And that is an easier policy hurdle to go
Yes,
than CHIPS Act,
definitely.
right?
The national
I
security.
love this conversation.
Yeah.
And I want to build on what you just said, Tate. Now, I'm going to come to you in 1 second, but John McKeel, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second. Because I love the direction of this conversation because it's not just about TSMC and fab sites. It's actually about sort of a collective ecosystem that might draw in foreign direct investment from China, but also thinks creatively about strategic economic development. So you and I first got to know each other a decade and a half ago when we were working on the strategic economic plan for Washington, D.C. And you then went on from your MBA career and you worked for the mayor's office in dealing with the EB5 money that came in. Is that right? Talk a little bit about not just getting the money and how you did it, but how that plan thought creatively about building different industries. And I wonder if we as a group may go to a couple of different people and think about like, what's the strategic economic plan that we have for Phoenix, for Cape Gallego, right? So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was actually a really fantastic model. And one of the strongest aspects of the model was the university ended up being a catalyst for a lot of business ideas because there was a core team of consultants that were MBA students that were used to conduct interviews with the top business folks all throughout the city of DC, right? And worked in coordination and in tandem with the mayor's office to compile this data and drive and build and structure a strategy, right? And establish ideas and priorities. What was really interesting about this was I focused a lot on the FDI pieces, on the international pieces, but then went to work for the mayor's office afterwards. And the KPIs were real. Like we actually established KPIs from this process that we followed at the mayor's office afterwards. And we were checking boxes on goals. How much money did we bring in? How many investors did we pull? So when we're speaking about attracting foreign direct investment, this built the path for an uptake in foreign direct investment in DC.
Yeah, please take.
And like, I'll just piggyback off of what you just said and what Doug has said, like ASU is that university now. Like 15, 20 years ago, I don't think that we had that capacity to serve as the neutral platform, but I think that we have it now. And as we, continue the conversation on vocational training, but also, spoke to the executive director of Fulton, who does the business development out there. We're also doing the culture communication and bridging that gap as well. So
I have to come clean about something, and I want to be very honest. I didn't come in here with an agenda of planting this seed, but I'm going to plant this seed. John Barry, this could be a really interesting thing to pursue, which is that we're not just having conversations about U.S. China relations and how we can kind of be cheerleaders for creating. There may be a real strategic economic planning process. And John, you've done this with the city of DC, and it sounds like both of you have done it in your respective places. There may be something that's really interesting here that is a strategic economic planning process that deals with the expertise in this room and at this school, but also at this university, to your point, Tate, it kind of thinks deeply about this. I'm liking this idea.
Yeah, there is something specific to China too.
Well, in this case, I think because I've started with the premise that, U.S. China relations is at a critical point and local relationships are going to be the center point, and Phoenix is really a critical place right now because of TSMC and because of its vast economic growth, et cetera. So I would be thinking specifically about what is, with the interest in this room, what is the strategic economic plan as it relates to the next 5 years of economic development around Chinese collaboration, Chinese capital, those kinds of things. So yes, I'm not saying go to Gallego and say let us do your strategic plan, but specifically on this topic.
Yeah, because I think she, Chris Mackey, I assume. She runs economic development in the city of Phoenix, but all of our entities, the city, the Arizona Economic Authority, GPAC, they already have strategic plans and have executed actually, I think, really well in terms of economic development, right? Look at where we are.
Yeah.
So I think though, just to hone in on what you're saying, I think we're saying, should we introduce the idea of intentionally broaching the Arizona, China
Yes.
piece of the strategic plan,
right.
which may not be built out yet, or maybe no one has thought very intentionally about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lisa, did you want to jump in?
So my question actually related to her comments. So, you know, we know the Mayor Gallego and the GPAC, they've been putting a lot of effort to track the business from Korea, from, you know, other places. You know, she took delegations to many different places. I'm not aware of any trip to China. So I'm just wondering if besides the CHIP Act, you know, national security, any other hurdles that would prevent, you know, the city from, you know, doing business with Chinese companies, you know, trying to attract Chinese companies coming to Phoenix. So I don't know if anybody's aware of anything else, because I don't know why, because I know they're making a lot of trips to other places, but not to China.
I think it's a lot to do with visibility, which also brings back to his initial point about, I believe he said,
Neoclassical.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we don't really talk about. And I think if we were to look at the influence of rise in cultures, rise in economic, process, due process on all of that stuff, I think there's a good amount of information that doesn't really get transferred to on both sides.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that if we do work on, regardless of the CHIPS Act or not, that might boost small to medium enterprises to try and say, okay, you know what, I will source more. And the other thing about, sorry to bring back the other discussion, but the other thing about capitalism versus the non-capitalistic tendency about the market, I think they both are joined at the hip. You can't have one without the other. You can't expect a country to grow without having the opportunity for another country to not pursue a particular path, right? And I think that's not often spoken about and or even researched about. Because if you think about it, we as in the United States outsources a lot of its stuff out to countries like China and other cheaper labor places because it has that opportunity. Should cost of living, expenses, everything increase in those countries, you might have had a flip in positions. What should we say then? Should your stance be taken onto those countries about what US is? I think that's a very interesting debate that we don't often speak about.
Yeah. And I would love to come back and debate that more with you. Matthew, I know you wanted to jump in here and I have one other couple things and I know we're getting to time, but.
Yeah, I just had a question, particularly about Kate's experience, like in Dallas. I'm from Texas. I'm from Houston, so unfortunately, no love for Dallas. But a great question that I had though is, I guess, like a question that I had was, you know, like Dallas and like the major cities in Texas are like, major cities in the U.S. tend to lean pretty progressive, right, which allow us to sort of collaborate on topics like smart cities and that kind of stuff. But like in Texas in particular, and in Arizona in particular, there's like 3 to 2 basically major cities, right? In Arizona, it's Phoenix and Tucson. In Texas, it's like the economic triangle of like Dallas, Houston, Austin, right? How do you, I guess, how do you push that out of those super centers, right? Like it's got to start somewhere, I guess, but like how do you sort of push those kinds of developments like out? Because like you do have those tier 1 cities like, you know, Houston, Dallas, Austin, or even like Beijing, Shanghai, like all that kind of stuff, right? There's like tier 1, tier 2 cities, but like there's tier 2 and 3 cities, like in Texas, for example, Laredo, right? Like Amarillo, like even cities on the border, like El Paso and McAllen, are like huge sort of industrial areas, but like I don't ever see the city, you know, thinking about like a U.S. China relation, right? They're kind of focused either on your neighbors or they kind of leave that to like the global sort of cosmopolitan cities. So I guess like what would be, I guess this is an open question, but since you have experience in Dallas, like what do you think about trying to push that out from those major cities out to tier 2, tier 3 cities?
I think like, for example, with the Dallas case study, so many private companies were willing to donate their IP and their technology because it was a tier one and they had a stage. Anytime that you have a good economic or smart cities plan, you first start off with what does the community want? You go out and take those surveys, have those town halls. And so I think my first suggestion would be you can't bite that, like you can't eat the whole cake in a second or third sized city. But you can ask the community, what do you want? And those technology, then you can kind of prioritize what technologies you would implement. To answer your second question, reflecting on my education in Texas, had I not studied international relations, I had 1 year of global history. So I think, the questions of how is U.S. China relations going to impact me as a citizen of Laredo, or like, I don't know what the equivalent would be here, but I think it goes back to education and asking our policies in education to go larger with a lens of teaching more, so people can think more critically about how do global things impact them on a local level.
I love that. And but again, there's a bunch of really interesting topics here, and I don't want to close off good conversation, but I do want to just highlight a couple of things. And first, Matthew, this issue I think is really important because Phoenix is the fastest growing economy in Arizona and in the country maybe, and it's one of the largest economies in the country now. And it's important, but and Tempe is special for all of us because of ASU. But I was so moved when I was in Zhenjiang. Zhenjiang, most Americans have never heard of Zhenjiang, right? But, it's a city with history, and Changzhou's over here and Nanjing's over here. And here I am talking to this guy in Zhenjiang, and we're talking about Zhenjiang and Tempe, right? And we're doing a course right now on applied learning we have a Mandarin Masters of Leadership and Management, and we're really pushing out this idea of how can we make this better? And so I was like, well, I know the director of the Bureau of Commerce in Zhenjiang. Let's do applied learning. Like, let's have these students be the consultants for the Bureau of Commerce in Zhenjiang, right? And so there's got to be different creative ways. So I don't think there's one easy answer about how we get awareness, but there have got to be a lot of ways. And it's one of the reasons my research team, we're so obsessed with second and third tier cities. We're like, everybody knows the story of Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Beijing, right? But do you know the story of Dongguan? Do you know the story of, any number of second and third tier cities that nobody's ever heard of, right? Do people know that Changzhou is the global leader in the entire world right now on EV batteries, right? That's interesting, right? How did they do that? And so those kinds of case studies I think are really important, but how we get that out there is really important. Did you want to jump into this?
Yeah, I so appreciate that Aaron's here too, because what is the role of art? What is the role of food? What is the role of sports and culture? And I think that, yes, we can talk about economic development, but we also need to think about how do we get to know each other as larger cultures, but humans one-on-one.
I want to come to you in a second, Mayor, but just on this, I was just on a call this morning. We were talking about the creative industries, and one of my collaborators in China was like, well, do you know Hefei? Hefei, they strategically went out and said, we're going to develop in the creative industries. And it was so fascinating to me to be hearing a Bureau of Commerce in Hefei decided that they were going to target creative industries. I never knew that, it was just one of these, but Aaron, you jump in.
No, for sure. I love it. I had the honor, kind of miracle, to go last month to Chengdu, my first time, and it's just like the States. So often people don't realize, depending on where you are, it's a completely different culture. You visit, most people come here and visit New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, the big cities. And, places like Phoenix are like, what's Phoenix, So in Chengdu, one of the coolest things where China's known for, you know, a big city makes their batteries, or they do this and the clothing. So one of the initiatives, and I think a big reason why I was able to attend my work with museums, Chengdu is working on becoming known for being a museum city. And I believe they have over 200 museums in their city, and they're just really making it happen, you know, so that connection again to the arts, to the culture, to the people, you know, them having a celebrity panda, you know, and just looking back to like, you know, panda diplomacy, you know, and things like that, that really just connect everyday people, because like everyday people, most of the people who don't know or follow stuff like this, regular people are going to be so lost in any of the conversation we're having. But if you talk about food, you talk about culture, you talk about art, animals, that people can connect to that wherever they're from. So the question that I wanted to bring up, and kind of what I'm always thinking about, and I would love to talk with you. I read an article, this was during COVID, that there was more foreigners in China in 1921 than are now. Is the amount of foreigners in China, and especially Americans, an issue? Or, you know, is that something that we need to be working on, concerned about, you know?
You know, I have an immediate set of thoughts on that, but anybody want to jump in?
One comment. So my background in China is a little bit different, more military focused, security, and a lot of reverse engineering over the years. They were buying MiG-21s from the Soviets and then building them themselves and then selling them to Pakistan as F-7s.
Right.
And just a history of doing that. And I think that over the years, there's a lack of trust, I think, on both sides.
Yeah.
And also with the intellectual property. So what's the status of intellectual property rights in China? Because we can build relationships, but without building it on trust on both sides, it's going to be difficult to actually get anything done.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was going to move to a slide that do it, but I'll just quickly answer a couple of questions. And again, I don't want to cut off conversation, but I want to make sure we get out of here on time, and I want to leave us with a couple of ideas. First to start there, you know, we certainly need to think carefully about intellectual property. And I am, as much as I'm viewed as a China bull, you know, I would be silly to pretend that things didn't happen. There were real burns for a lot of people. One of the things that I think is really important here, however, is to remember that when we're in global economies, and particularly when we're dealing with courts that are, you know, in localities where violations actually happen, you know, like you need to think carefully, and you need to assume that your IP is going to go, right? Now, the interesting thing about China on the IP issue is that China's sort of gone through an interesting evolution over the last 40 years on this point, right? So if you think about Deng Xiaoping coming to visit Jimmy Carter in 1979, Deng Xiaoping, my favorite leadership story, probably ever, right? This kid was 15 years old in 1919, and he was getting on a boat in steerage to go to France, and his father didn't want him to go. He said, "Why are you going to France?" He said, "I want to go learn everything I can from the West and come back and save China." This is 1919, right? Now, Deng Xiaoping made it through the next 60 years, and he saved China, right? And the mindset was the same. We need to learn. We're in trouble, guys. We need to learn everything we can. So in the 80s, and to some extent in the 90s, the idea was learn everything you can, steal all the intellectual property you can. That's the game, right? And in the 80s, that was sort of an open secret. In the 90s, it was baked into the contracts because you couldn't be in China and be a major corporation without a joint venture contract and technology transfer agreements, right? And so it was just still baked into the pie. The interesting thing is I watched it over the course in 2001, joint venture agreements and mandated technology transfer becomes illegal by WTO standards. So you couldn't have a quid pro quo for market access. And in that time, I believe we start to see changes happening, and we start to see a movement in what was then called the Shanghai movement. The Shanghai movement was copycat culture, but the idea was what was called a mountain fortress, and like you just take what you could and produce what you could. I'll tell you one funny story about this. Forgive me for talking about my own experiences, but can you see those? This is actually a really funny moment when I was first working at Apple. So you'll notice the one on the left says iPhone, designed by Apple in California, assembled in China. Right? You're laughing. It's very arrogant, right? Right? Which is the real iPhone? And which is the black market iPhone? Right. Left is real. The left is real, and the right hand side is. That's what you would think. So when I got to China and I was trying to figure out how to repair Apple's reputation, and I was like, we cannot be this arrogant company that just, assumes that everything in China is crap. And actually, a lot of our parts are the manufacturing supply chain. Yes, we own the patents for the phone, but we wouldn't be making this without Zhou Xunpei and Lens, right? So let's take that off. We thought about it for a while. Finally, Tim was like, okay, Doug, okay, we'll take it off. And then the next group of phones that comes out in 2016, I'm on the phone like, what is going on? I thought we took that off. And we did. So it turns out I went to a black market vendor and I was like, why does this say this? And he was like, well, we all know how arrogant Apple is. And we realized that we wouldn't be able to sell a phone that didn't have this on it. So we put it on anyway because
That's the fake.
so the real phone so for a year, and the fake phone is the one that says not by Apple in California so much. So anyway, sorry for but to this point, we have to be careful and we have to be thoughtful about it. But I just would argue that China has evolved too. And they have evolved to a point where they are very proud of what they're contributing. So a lot of my work for Apple and sort of helping to repair Apple's reputation in China was about respect. It was about we have to treat our Chinese collaborators respectfully, and then they won't steal stuff, right? If we treat them as equal partners and we say, this is ours and this is yours and this is what we're all collaborating and let's be partners in this. Just trust me, it's grown, the mindset has grown over the last 20 to 30 years. And so I would argue, I'm not here to in rose-colored glasses and say it's not going to happen and it doesn't happen. But I do think a collaborative mindset takes us a long direction in negotiating and the understanding of intellectual property. My favorite book in this area is by a Harvard Law School professor named Bill Alfred. He wrote a book some years ago, about 10 years ago, called To Steal a Book is an Elegant Offense. And basically, he writes about the ways in which intellectual property evolves over 2,000 years since Confucianism. And it's just a different mindset, right? The idea of owning ideas is different in the Western mindset than it. So it's not to say it doesn't happen. It's not to say it won't. But I do think that China is in a different place of negotiating now than ever. Make sense? Okay. I know we're getting late on time, and I love this conversation. So I wish John was here so we could thank him, but thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Barry, and everybody else, Sunny and Lynn, for being here. I got a couple of things. First of all, this isn't the 150 people we had at your event, Barry, but this is a good number. I love this number and I love this room. And I wish people online could, I hope you're all feeling the joy in the room, but also I wish we could hear you more, and we'll figure out a way to do that better in an interactive way. We'll put that on our list of things to do, right? But a couple of things that I'm taking away here. One, the conversation is important, it works, and I think you're all with me that this is an important moment in time right now to be having this conversation, and we need to continue it, right? And so we've agreed with the Chinese Chamber of Commerce to do this once a month, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is just the first of the next 6 months of conversations where we're going to be talking about this. The second thing that I want to take away is I love the fact that this wasn't just a lecture about China and some interactive things about do we trust the data or not, or what do we do? This felt like a real generative conversation to me about strategic planning, right? And so Pearl and Tate, I want to take sort of a step back and we'll grab John McKeel over here and a couple of other people, Aaron, you, and I want us to think creatively about what we can do in these town hall meetings that are not just how do we share real information, but how do we think about a plan forward as a community, right? How do we do our Chinese investment strategic planning process that gets the right civic organizations together, the right public-private partnerships together, the right people at the table who represent the China investment community? How do we do all of that? And so the next conversation then is not just about what's in the news today and what do we want to talk about, but like, how are we moving this forward and helping Phoenix? So I love that. That was not what I was expecting here, and this is exciting for me. The third thing that I'll just mention, and this is a little bit of a plug, and Brian Scott says, thank you so much for continuing these discussions for the community at large. It's wonderful. The one other thing that I'll say, and I'll put this on as an agenda item for us all. Again, taking this conversation away from the punditry in Washington and saying this conversation exists with us. I want you all to think about your fantasy person who would be unexpected, who we would have as a guest at our next event. Now, as we were discussing, it's expensive to fly back and forth from China today. But if you remember, if you were at the Global Ties event, when we were down in the Global Forum, we have a huge screen down there. And we had one of my collaborators from Shanghai on that screen, and she was talking to us about things. Now, the reason I bring this up is that I think we too often go to pundits who we think are the experts, and we forget about people who are one step below, maybe not quite as visible, and are the real people. And I'll just tell you a quick story about this one. Does anybody recognize this guy in the bottom left? Anybody? Come on. Well, it's good that nobody recognized them because that's part of the story. So when we were, that guy is Justin Lin. Lin Yifu, right? So Justin Lin was the chief economist of the World Bank in 2010, 11, 12. And I was dean at George Washington University, and I was like, wow, Justin Lin. People may know his story. He's famous because he's the guy who was across the street. He's the guy who put basketballs under his arms and jumped in the Taiwan Strait and swam over to China and then lived his life. He got his economics degree at Tsinghua University. Yeah, it's a famous story. But we became friends when I was in DC. And he retired from the World Bank and went back to Beijing University, and started an economics unit there. And we were in trouble. Apple was in trouble in China, and I didn't know what to do. And I couldn't convince Tim that we were in trouble. And so I thought, I'm gonna call up Justin. Like, Justin, I respect him as an economist. He will help me. So I call up Justin, fly up to Beijing, meet with him. And Justin's listening, very sweet, thoughtful, down-to-earth person. And he says to me, he's like, well, I hear what you're saying, Doug. In my meeting tomorrow with Xi, I'll just bring this up and we'll figure out what to do. And I was like, what did you say? I said, well, I have weekly meetings with President Xi, so like, we'll figure out how to get this settled for you. And damned if it didn't help us so much to be talking to Justin Lin, because it gave me a line on what to do. The reason I raised this is not to brag about knowing Justin Lin, but to raise for you the surprise in people that we know, right? Sometimes it's not the Tim Cooks of the world that we need to bring and talk to. It's the Justin Lins of the world who actually have access to people. And so I would just invite all of you to think about your fantasy person. Think about fantasy person that you know from your time in China, right? That we might like to see on a global screen. And, again, these days we don't have to pay the money for a plane ticket and the difficulty of having them fly over. We can get them on a Zoom channel and, we can have a conversation. So I want all of us to think about, as we work for our next steps, about the next town hall, about strategic planning or building the infrastructure here in the manufacturing supply chain in a very creative way with Chinese capital and in collaboration with Chinese entities. Who's your fantasy person that you would like to have at one of these meetings, right? And we might not get them the next time, but we might get them the next time or the next time, right? That makes sense, everybody? So those are my closing. Anybody else have closing? John, any final words? Any final words?
No, you It's ending, it's finished?
Well, just wanna make sure we're finishing up in terms of what, anybody has final
I
comments.
say this is a great seminar and we'll try to make a series of seminars. And this is the beginning and we'll everybody here in the future events and we'll continue the same talk about this China and American relation and hopefully make things better, not even worse.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Barry, any final thoughts?
No, I think you've opened up good dialogue, so with more specific action items.
Awesome.
That steers it to a different direction in terms of your series.
Okay. Lisa, anything?
I think the action item to develop a future strategic plan is a good idea. And we can find the resources too, like we have relationship with the consulate in Los Angeles. We can talk to them if we need somebody, some support.
Yeah.
So we continue to work together as partners to make this happen.
I love that. And we will continue to be working together through me, but we will be helping with everybody in this room, sending out notes about what it is that we're doing and asking for your ideas. All right, Pearl, you're on the spot, and Tate, you're on the spot last. So any final comment?
No, just thank you. I really learned a lot being here and appreciated this conversation. So looking forward to next steps.
Love it. And tell us the name again of your company.
Sun Strategies, and it's Sun, which is like, it means kindness in Mandarin, but it's also part of Gai Sun, which is to improve. Okay. So that's like, it was the social impact generating part of the company.
Beautiful. Thank you. And Tate, representative of Thunderbird and the Foreign Policy Initiative, any final words?
Thanks, y'all. For the next event, just follow us on Foreign Policy Initiative and it'll be thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so much for being here. Really meant a lot. And thank you, John and Lisa. Thank you, everybody online. So great being with you, and we'll be in touch for the next one.